Johann Sebastian Bach. Introduction by Sean McHugh, April 2025. Achievement. Johann Sebastian Bach was a German composer of the late Baroque period who took its characteristics of complex counterpoint or combination of multiple lines plus open-ended melody to a high point of development. This often static density issues from Renaissance polyphony with its less directional modal harmony up to 1600, and aesthetic experience and spirituality here access an omnipresent, timeless divine where transcendence is in terms of immanence rather than progress and change. Accordingly, Bach's expression is inwardly inquiring and intimate, while his own sacred motets, more specifically under modal style, are among his masterpieces. However, the Enlightenment movement of increasing rationalism developed across his century, leading to modernity as dialectical processes in music and society of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis for radical material innovation. After his death in 1750, the classical period in this spirit emerged as balance of proportion, closed melody, and perspicuity, although historical divisions generally are weakly defined with cross-currents and multiple advances over time. Bach's output is exceptionally consistent in quality, notably balancing intuitive artistry with intellectual construction. He wrote for a variety forms and forces, including large-scale vocal works, but had little interest in opera as depicting worldly drama. His greatest isolated music, and having matchless depth, is the limited sets of works for solo cello and violin from his mid-30s while working at Cohen. He took forward harmonic processes and diversity of key or background logic, while absorbing foreign styles into his own well-defined personality, expressive of German culture, particularly in the orderly intellectual content that becomes relentless and hypnotic, including via the forms of fugue and canon, where material overlaps self-referentially. Bach is one of the greatest composers and figures in Western civilization. Life and influences. He was born in Eisenach in Thuringia state in central Germany as his parents' eighth and last child, in a family with a musical history in the area dating to the late 16th century and with several current members employed in music. He lived in 9 main locations with the first half of his life in Thuringia. The 5 locations in Thuringia are Eisenach, Ohrdruf, Weimar, Arnstadt, and Mühlhausen, and the others elsewhere are Lüneburg, Lübeck, Cothen, and Leipzig. His father, Johann Ambrosius, likely taught him theory and violin, but he died in 1694, following his mother Elisabeth Lämmerhirt the year before. Hence, from 10 years old, he lived alongside his brother Johann Jakob for 5 years with their eldest brother Johann Christoph as guardian, who was working as church organist for 5 years at Ohrdruf nearby to the east. Johann Christoph was employment there for 31 years, from 1690 to his death in 1721. Johann Sebastian gained familiarity with South German and Italian composers and attended a local school, but in 1700 moved to a senior one in Lüneburg in the north for further music study and exposure to wider European culture. In 1703, at 18, he returned to Thuringia to work for 7 months for the court of Duke Johann Ernst III in Weimar as a chapel musician, but then later in the year moved for 4 years to Neuchurch in Arnstadt to the southwest as organist. Tension built over time between him and the authorities there, including his taking excess leave in 1705-6 for travel to Lübeck in the far north, much of the journey being made on foot, to meet and gain tuition from 2 composer organists, the Dane Dieterich Buxtehude and Dutch-German Johann Reinken. Bach visited Reinken again in 1720. In 1707, he moved for just under a year to Blasius Church in Mühlhausen, again in Thuringia to the northwest, for the organist position, with improved conditions and performers, and where he married his second cousin, Maria Barbara Bach. He then returned for a decade from 1708 to 17 to the Weimar Duke, where, from 1714, he was full music director, working with a large and well-funded group of professional musicians. The Bachs took a house, were joined by his wife's elder unmarried sister to help the household, and had several children, first a girl, then 3 sons, including Wilhelm Friedemann and Carl Philipp Emanuel, later becoming 2 of Bach's 4 composer sons, followed by twins and 1 more, but who died within their first year. In Weimar, Bach engaged in sustained keyboard and orchestral composition involving Italian influence, particularly from his close contemporary Vivaldi, and the older Corelli and Torelli. He began the first of 2 sets of the preludes and fugues form in all 24 keys that explored a wide variety of techniques and became the well-tempered clavier, one of his century's greatest artistic achievements. The second set was begun around 1739. A clavier is a keyboard instrument, but here specifically a harpsichord, tuned to equal temperament or deviation away from natural frequencies to provide for the harmonic keys given with equal accuracy. Most of Bach's organ works are from Weimar, where Georg Bohm was an initial influence, as also being from Thuringia, but working at St. John's Church in Lüneburg when Bach was there. Then the music director position involved composing monthly cantatas for various forces with sacred texts, the first of his long series into the 1720s. In 1717, he again indicated his independence of mind in falling out of favor and being discharged along with detained for a month by the local judge. Next, in the same year, Bach moved for 6 years to Prince Leopold of Cothen, northwest of Weimar, in the next state, for a music directorship, and who, as a more austere Calvinist Protestant, required no elaborate church service music, and allowed Bach to focus on secular forms in both composition and performance. He wrote the cello suites and solo violin sonatas and partitas, along with the 6 orchestral Brandenburg concertos, as they would be titled, an original interpretation over several years of the contemporary grand concerto orchestral form, but which were first published only in 1849. Bach was born in March 1685, and Handel only the month before, with Handel's hometown Halle in the next province, but they never met, despite in 1719 Bach making the 35 kilometers journey from Cothen hoping to meet him. Handel had left town as spending much of his life elsewhere from 1703. Moreover, 11 years later in 1730, Wilhelm Friedemann traveled there and did meet Handel to invite him to visit the Bach family, then in Leipzig, the same distance south, but it didn't take place. In 1720, Bach and Leopold were away in Carlsbad to the south, now in the Czech Republic, when his wife died suddenly at age 35. The next year he met Anna Magdalena Wilke, a soprano at the court 16 years younger, and they married in December 1721. They had 13 children, of whom 6 survived into adulthood, including Johann Christian and Johann Christoph Friedrich, Bach's other 2 sons who became composers. Also in 1721, Bach submitted his Brandenburg concertos to the Brandenburg-Schwedt Principality in the northeast in an unsuccessful application for another change of employment. Finally, in 1723, Bach moved for the rest of his 27 years to St. Thomas's Church in Leipzig as music director, a leading position in German Protestantism, providing music across several major Leipzig churches and instructing associated students. Again, there were disagreements, but he gained renown, including honorary appointments at the courts of Cothen, Weissenfels, and Dresden. His predecessor was Kuhnau from 1701-22, who he had both visited there and twice met for testing organs elsewhere. But the position was first offered to Telemann in Hamburg and then Graupner in Darmstadt, with both these declining and instead using the offers to negotiate better terms of employment where they were. In 1729, Bach also gained control of the Collegia Musicum, a secular performance ensemble with university students that had Telemann started, but which other cities likewise had, further consolidating his regional influence. Bach's group gave a wide range of free concerts at a Leipzig coffee shop called Café Zimmermann until the proprietor's death in 1741. Alongside this, in 1736, he was royal court composer for the Poland and Saxony monarch, partly with a view to improved bargaining with the Leipzig government.
In 1747, he also visited the Prussian king Frederick the Great in Potsdam in the northeast, who Carl Philipp Emanuel was working for, and from which developed the contrapuntal work, The Musical Offering. His health declined in the late 1740s and worsened after eye surgery by a fraudulent British operator, leading to his death while his wife survived him by 10 years. Bach received public recognition in his lifetime, particularly as an organist, while his music wasn't well understood due to its technical complexity and the historical movement towards transparency of form and linear, more teleological argumentation. Posthumously, his composer reputation declined further, but Carl Philipp Emanuel safeguarded the bulk of the yet unpublished work before it increased steadily with, for example, the young Beethoven towards the end of the century playing the well-tempered clavier, and Mendelssohn in 1829 conducting a performance of the St. Matthew Passion. A Bach revival process led to an addition of his works and increasing scholarship, with important composers recognizing his achievement, while in the 1930s, Pablo Casals made the first and interpretively unsurpassable complete recordings of the cello suites. Moreover, the major early 20th century development of serial non-tonal harmony, incorporating maximum contrapuntal complexity developed by the Austrian Schoenberg, compares with the modal non-tonal harmony and complexity informing Bach. Controversy. Contrary to assumptions, Bach may not have been a Christian and instead kept his own spirituality and understanding of the divine. He worked in church capacities because these were the available employers and roles, having good instruments and musicians, while almost all of his vast sacred music output was only written to order, and also where the cantatas show subtle irony and smirk. Bach's technique is concerned with abstraction, purity, and uncompromising high aesthetic construction, all incompatible even with the more puritanical forms of Christianity as essentially uncritical dogma, scriptural contradiction, endless ritual, and power hierarchies. For the opening few years in Leipzig in the mid-1720s, his Lutheran church required a new cantata for each Sunday, plus other points during the liturgical year as involving combinations of small orchestra, choir, and vocal plus instrumental soloists, usually setting texts commenting on the gospel readings of the day and around 25 minutes to perform. 3 complete cycles totaling 200 are extant, although in 2 Bach obituaries, including by Carl Philipp Emanuel, there are 5 cycles mentioned. There's no strong evidence that the other 2 were written, and instead were likely at most claimed by Bach. His enthusiasm for cantata writing declined with increasing reworking of existing material. The second cycle focusing on the chorale format as less outwardly diverse and easier to work with, and the third developed over several years rather than one. Then, for the fourth, due for 1728-9, Bach selected the irreverent satirist and light-hearted poet Christian Friedrich Henrici with the pen name Picander to provide more flexible and facile texts. There are 9 extant cantatas for this cycle for different points in the year that Bach may have provided new as needed. The Lutheran Church is from Renaissance German Martin Luther, who helped reform Christianity, and resulting in the Catholic-Protestant split. He promoted the devotional modal polyphony of his time, while also composing chorals or hymn melodies, which were later greatly added to by parish composers. Bach is entirely at one with Renaissance and Lutheran ideals of spiritual purity and concomitant homogeneous counterpoint alongside his abstract use of Renaissance dance forms in suites for many instruments. Polyphony also means many voices, aligning with his independent critical mind. His music has uncompromising objectivity, but powerful inward searching, with limited stylistic development across his output. Again, this is all aligned with a personal understanding of God opposed to organized religion, with its regimentation, groupthink, shepherding, and extra baggage. Hence the subtle humor across the cantatas is saying how he can redeploy his immense skill as tediously necessary within the same idiom away from wider interests.
He understands the element of foolishness in endless new cantatas as likewise required by contemporaries in similar roles. However, this colossal 60-hour block of consistently outstanding works explores in its contained minimalist style the possibilities of the form, having magnificent counterpoint and argumentation, plus peerless aesthetic and spiritual reach. The sacred cantatas comprise a third of his total compositional output, in terms of time, and is the largest set of music in a closed form by any composer. They're accompanied by 20 secular cantatas that approach the arias and other forms of opera, while their texts are often after Greek myth as predating the New Testament. Leipzig audiences could experience a limited and toughened conception of the Dresden Royal Opera to the east. The best complete cantatas recording is under conductor Peter Jan Lusink with the Netherlands Bach Collegium, Holland Boys Choir, and assigned soloists. It was recorded in 1999-2000, over 15 months, in a timescale of the same order as the work's composition, and providing a parallel unity, consistency, stoicism, and direct business-like dispatch beyond other recordings. The Lusink was done by performing successively in the same sessions the movements of different cantatas involving the same or similar scoring, and thus saving greatly on organizational time and other musicians being present as when individual cantatas are performed. Some cohesion is lost across each work, but hugely gained across the whole, while avoiding anachronistic overcharacterization and distinctions as benightedly imported from later music by other conductors. This resulting stylistic focus and ruthlessness access the interlocking nature of the fabulous variety of Bach's project, while other recorded cycles, performing cantata by cantata and taking decades, inevitably feature incongruous changes in approach, personnel, and technology. Individually conceived works of music, as particularly from later historical periods, are often undermined by box sets with the same artistic angles and performing forces, but Lusink's format takes the listener inwards superbly here. Then, particularly in the harpsichord music, the homogeneity of complexity, as lacking later period structures of beginning, dramatic center, peroration, and resolution, means the aesthetic content doesn't conclusively resolve within the listener familiarization and internalization process. Regardless of repeated listening, the intuitive response in the moment remains ascendant over wider intellectual closure. Although this can seem stifling, it's more the rationalism away from experienced reality as prioritized by classical values and the Enlightenment and onwards in Western civilization that is downgraded. Bach provides emergent logic in context and inner critical distance rather than formal frames imposed from without as necessarily groundless and false. The structures peer through in a similar way to great Cubist paintings with their subtle key lines and focus despite the immanent complexity. Bach stays more contained within motivic logic in the moment, as distinct from material organized under contrivedly pre-compositional, external, and intellectually perspicuous framing. Nonetheless, though, Wagner and others often better provide the unity of intuition with its refined holistic references and intellect with its linear argument by understanding intellect as a subset of emergent logic. Moreover, finding objectivity out of more immanent logic and not Apollonian civilization structural landmarks and sky castle thinking, paradoxically means that such motivic composers' voices are stamped on every bar like no others. Bach's inwardly referenced working and extended themes in a static lattice change in classical and later music into transformation via dialectic opposition of ideas, but where the new ideas with their framing are no more grounded than before. Bach had the confidence to prioritize holistic interconnection over transparent architectonics, while the Enlightenment places intellect over intuition and critiques Baroque notions of the ineffable divine. Indeed, the central project in Western philosophy of epistemology, or grounding knowledge in intellectual terms, was impossible in principle, and plain rational account has displaced neither the critical mind's subtly holistic evaluation process nor spirituality. Architectonic pillars and purely intellectual account
only provide fanciful relative relations rather than absolute truth beyond, and motivic composers use them at most as a trellis for more absorbing and meaningful constructions, with neither affected clinching moments nor loss of the moment elsewhere. Bach stays within the Hindu Nataraja as the mind's containment within the aesthetic intuition, and away from the groundless intellect and error beyond. The cello suites show that the greatest art is via containment within subtle structures, not modernist attempts to foreground and dialectically build on transparent structures as supposedly only hidden. Any thoughts?